Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is a banana, Enseti ventricosum morellii. And all winter long, I've looked after it very carefully, making sure that it doesn't get remotely frosted, because this is a completely tender plant. A touch of cold can kill it stone dead. But we've brought it out into the light. Now, even though it has been kept in the dark, wrapped up, bone dry, it's still grown a few leaves. These are nothing compared to what it can do. But these ones here will never amount to anything. So what I'm going to do is cut it back now after planting so we can start again. So we just have this shoot which will unfurl into a leaf appearing, but I know that a lot more will very quickly come. Certainly if we get a nice warm summer and I water it well, this will become magnificent. Now, coming up on today's programme, Arit continues her investigation into the use of peat in horticulture and discovers what the industry are doing to make positive changes.
There's some technical challenges we need to overcome to ensure that the product works as well as peat base. We don't want to disappoint the gardener.
Carol celebrates the many magnificent and varied euphorbia.
These are the plants that shine forth with these brilliant beacons, and this is their time.
And I'm going to be planting up a pot of herbs that will grow happily in shade. How about this? This is another banana, Musa balbisiana. And there's no question that adding a banana or canna or any large leaf plant conjures up a tropical feel to a garden. Now, Musa basjou, which I also grow, is hardy to about -5, but I've lost one before in this garden. I kept it outside over winter, and even though it was wrapped up in fleece, it was killed by cold. So, although they're great in a small garden, you need somewhere to store them. So if you're a bit short on storage space, but you still want that extravagant, dramatic feel that bananas give you, try growing cannas. And this one is called Canna musifolia, and I love it. And musifolia means leaves like a banana, and it's for the foliage that I grow it rather than the flowers. It's really beautiful, and like the banana, it's elegant as well as luscious. Now, when you're planting cannas, you do need to make sure that they've got all the richness that you can give them. If you've got a thin soil, it's worth adding some compost or soil conditioner to it. And the other thing that all cannas need is water. Now, this has been put into compost to overwinter, so if it falls off, I don't mind. And there we go. Right, I will give that a really good soak, even though I can feel the rain on my head. But bananas and cannas are plants that come from much warmer climes than this. They are exotic in themselves, but you don't have to go down that route to get that tropical feel in a garden. I'm a great fan of hostas, I love them, and I think a large hosta can hold its own with any banana or canna. I mean, look at this. This is Jurassic Park. And this will grow a metre tall. These leaves will double or triple in size. And these huge, slightly crumpled leaves with their heart shapes immediately conjure up the same sense of luxury and lushness that you get from cannas. And I know people often ask me about how you cope with slugs and snails with hostas. Well, the answer is to give them a decent root run and give them plenty of water and food. They're like cannas in that respect. If you cram them into a pot and let them get too dry, then they suffer, and that is when the slugs and snails go for them. And you don't even need a large one. If you take a small hosta like this one, this is the Pilgrim, it's about the impact and the feel that it gives to your garden. And if you get that tropical feel, then it's working. Now we're off to Cheshire to visit the garden of Ken Black, who shares his real burning passion for a plant that is certainly not tropical, but always very beautiful.
Clematis provide a rhythm to the year. I can't think of another garden plant that would provide you with so much colour for so long a period. Some flower in the spring, some in the summer, some in the autumn, and also in the winter. And when they're in flower, in the breeze, they're just like ballet dancers. They are absolutely stunning. I probably have something like 120 different clematis planted in the garden, and possibly a similar number in pots. Once you add in the seedlings and the young clematis, it's far, far more than that. Somebody asked me why I grow so many clematis. Well, if you're growing from seed, you've got to let all the seedlings flower before you'll know what's worth keeping and what's not. I mean, I'm saying that as if I would actually throw a clematis away. I don't think I ever have. For some reason, spring-flowered clematis are not as popular as the summer ones, and yet they are easier to grow. They come from alpine regions, halfway up mountains. They'll take an English winter. They'll take all the cold you can throw at them. They're undemanding, and as long as you plant them in a spot where the roots are not too wet, they will reward you year after year. They don't even need pruning. You can cut them back after they're flowered if they're starting to take over a space you don't want them to. But the flowers are so pretty, as far as I'm concerned, they can take over all the space that they want. This is Blue Dancer. As you see, they are like ballerinas, and it provides a very nice contrast to the red and green of the rose as it's coming out, and some spring colour to match the rest of the border. I like the form of it, the fact that it hangs down, that it is so delicate. It's a real showstopper, and of course the bees love it as well. I started a clematis fence last year. At one end, I've planted some early flowering clematis, and right through to the other end of the fence to see if I can have clematis in flower all year round. It's work in progress. It's an interesting experiment, but given it's clematis, what could possibly go wrong? I think some clematis prefer being in pots than in the soil. Some of these early flowering ones don't like soils that are too wet. So you can give them the treatment that they need and move them into full view when they're in flower. In the wild, they will scramble over rocks and through shrubs, and they use their leaf stalks to grab hold, perhaps once or even twice, to get a good hold before growing on. They're good for an English garden, but they wouldn't climb easily up a conventional trellis. They would probably need some additional tying in to do that. Otherwise, they will just cling to each other. The good thing about these ties, they're made of paper with a thin piece of wire down the middle, so they wrap around the obelisk and the clematis very easily, inflicting no damage on the stem, and can be pushed apart when the stem gets thicker. Whenever I see a space in the garden, I automatically think clematis. And I can sometimes tell from my wife Helen's body language that clematis is not what she was thinking about. So there's a certain amount of negotiation about what goes where.
I wouldn't say they've taken over his life, but they play a very significant part in his life. And I do like them, but I'm not obsessed by them, and that's the difference.
One of the things Helen enjoys doing is growing annuals, and she's very good at it. So we do have some discussion about that. We keep the clematis towards the back of borders, and where we have shared borders, we find that the annuals in between the clematis actually provide some very good colour at a lower level that do complement both the roses and the clematis. So it works well, even if it's after a bit of awkwardness at the start of the discussion.
We bought a new greenhouse about 5 years ago. It was our anniversary present to each other. And it was quite a big greenhouse. But eventually, it was full of clematis. And I was wanting to grow some bedding. So we compromised, and he bought a small second-hand greenhouse. And then he bought a second small greenhouse, which is where the seedlings that have become young plants can sit. It's like a nursery bed. And then there's the gravel around the greenhouses, which are covered now in pots of clematis. And the ones that really flower and look as though they're going to do well, he'll keep. And maybe if he's doing some talks, he'll take them and try and sell them. But he can't help himself, really.
One of the questions I'm often asked is, why does my clematis die? And sometimes it's because it's a young clematis like this. Very good value, 3 for £5, bought from a supermarket or from a show. But it doesn't have a root system big enough really to cope with the average garden soil. So what I recommend is that you pot this on. This is a clematis that's a year older, and you can see the difference in the size of the root. That's much more suited to survive and thrive in your garden. So first, I'll take the flower off and the stem so that the clematis can put more energy into developing roots, and I'll pot it on into this 2-litre pot with some peat-free compost and grow it on for a year. And by this time next year, it should have filled the 2-litre pot and be ready to plant in the ground. If it was an early one, I would add more grit or sand to the compost just to make sure it was even more free draining. Apart from that, very easy.
I do think that's a really good point that Ken makes about the early clematis needing drainage. So often when we talk about clematis, we stress how much water they need. But varieties like Clematis alpino, macropetala, or even Clematis montana all do better with good drainage. And then the later clematis, you can give a really good water. Now, over the last 10 years or so, more and more of us are growing olives. I certainly wouldn't have thought of growing an olive here 10, 15 years ago, but I think we're all getting braver and realizing that they're much hardier than one might think. And also with climate change, it means they're not exposed to the same depth of frost that can devastate them. So if you're growing olives, you will need to prune them at some point, and now is the time to do it. And olives are very forgiving. You can prune them as hard as you like and they will regrow. If you're pruning it for shape, like one of these, this is essentially a pom-pom. You've got a long stem and then a ball on top, and that's a decorative feature. Or are you growing it for the fruit? And if you're growing it from fruit, you need to open it out. Fruit is formed on last year's new growth, and it never forms in the same place twice. So you need to keep regenerating that new growth. Now this is never going to have fruit, so I don't need to worry about that. But I do need to trim it so that we keep the compact shape. So if you've got areas in the middle like this which are a little bit bare, then you need to cut back hard into it rather than just trim around the edge. Because if I just keep clipping that round the edge, the interior will increasingly get more and more bare as the light fails to get through to it. The harder you cut it back, the better it will regrow. So don't be frightened of doing this. Now it's time to visit the first of your gardens in today's programme. And we're going off to the home counties, to Berkshire, to Adam Atkinson Young's garden, where he's got some really good tips on growing vegetables and fruit in small spaces.
Hi, I'm Adam and welcome to my garden. We live in Bracknell in Berkshire, and as you can see, it's a small, roughly 9-metre square garden. It's south facing with very sandy soil, and everything you can see has been planted and built over the past 8 years. One thing that's changed for me recently is that I've thought more about growing veg, but with limited space I needed to be creative. Luckily I'd kept hold of some old pallets, offcuts of wood, part of an old shed, and I decided to build these raised beds. So these are the finished planters, made from remnants of an old shed, bits of corrugated plastic that I had in the garage, and they get full sunlight here. And the reason that they're angled is because I wanted to try and use up the space as much as I could. So I also wanted to plant some strawberries this year for the first time. Now I already had these planters, but I needed something else. So going through the garage, seemed to have a lot of plastic. So I had this idea. Using these bottles, I cut into the side with a knife, and then manage to plant up some more strawberries. And maybe it's something you could do to reduce your plastic waste.
It is so important to try and cut down on our use of plastic, either, as Adam has done, by creating a new use for plastic which otherwise would be thrown away, or, as I do here, is to treasure your plastic. However, there is a lifetime for these. They do become unserviceable after a bit, but I'm going to use these plugs even though they are getting a bit brittle, because I want to sow some sweet corn. Now I'm going to fill this with compost and then use the plugs and put one seed in each of the plugs. Now this is a variety called Swift, and it's not the biggest sweet corn in the world, but it is absolutely delicious. I'm going to put my glasses on and just push them down into the compost. Now they will need to go somewhere warm. They thrive on heat, so give them it. Perfect, almost exactly the right number. Lightly cover that over. Label it, of course. In the background, I've got the chirruping song of the swallows, and I love it. I will water that and put it on the heated bench in the greenhouse. Now, while I'm about it, I'm also going to sow some cucumber. I'm going to put these into pots, and they like heat too, but I'm going to grow these outdoors. So I've chosen varieties that are best suited to growing outside. And I've got here Market More. Market More is a really tried and tested variety. They will need rich soil, heat, and plenty of water. And that's why I'm growing them in pots rather than plugs, because from the very beginning, they will have more soil to grow in and it will take up more moisture. Right, fill up the pots. And the reason why I'm putting 2 in each pot is not because I intend to grow 2, but as an insurance policy, because it means that I can guarantee that one of them will definitely germinate. Okay, we'll cover that up too. Now the compost I use for all my plants, whether it is sweet corn, cucumbers or whatever, is essentially homemade. And the one thing that isn't in it at all is peat. And I haven't used that for many, many years, and we're trying to be completely peat-free here at Longmeadow. And a couple of weeks ago, Arit went and visited a beautiful peat bog in Cumbria and saw how fragile that environment can be. And this week, she's talking to the trade and the industry who have used and depended upon peat for our benefit for a long time, and to see how they are reacting to the prospect of reducing and finally ceasing to use peat at all.
The peat bogs of the UK are such an incredible resource. They support a huge range of biodiversity, they help reduce flooding, and most importantly, store carbon. Many people are aware of the fact that trees remove carbon dioxide from the air. However, astonishingly, worldwide, peat holds twice the amount of carbon compared to all of the world's forests. But we've been extracting vast quantities of peat across the globe for years, and most of what we dig up here ends up in the horticultural industry and in our gardens. That's why in 2011 the government set out a voluntary target that by 2020 all retailers will have phased out peat in compost sold to amateur gardeners. Well, that deadline has come and gone, yet across the UK there are still peat-based composts in garden centres. We asked the Horticultural Trade Association, who represent manufacturers in the industry, to explain why growing media sold to us gardeners, that's compost, topsoils and soil conditioners, still contain peat.
I think one of the issues historically has been the suitability and the availability of alternatives. That's waste materials from the water industry, that's waste materials from the power generation industry, and waste materials from the food industry. And there's been a huge change in technology that allows these materials to be used as a peat substitute. I think good progress has been made because as of the end of 2020, peat content in growing media, in what you buy in the garden centre, has fallen down to 37% of content. It's not all the way where we want it to be, but I think there is a huge commitment from the consumer, from across the industry, to deliver on that. And with a little bit of help from government, I really do think that progress can be made to a peat-free environment.
So how is peat used in our compost? The peat that's been extracted from several sites across the UK, as well as Europe, ends up in factories where it's used in the compost we see at our garden centres and nurseries. Mark Portman is the Managing Director of Evergreen Garden Care, one of up to 20 manufacturers who make compost in the UK. Let's start with the basics. What are the ingredients in a compost bag?
There'll be various ingredients in a bag of compost. So some bags are 100% peat, but there's fewer and fewer of those. The other ingredients which are often used to create compost will be green compost, wood fibre, bark, and coir, the husks of coconuts. The peat is mixed with the other products in a hopper, and that will then filter the peat into a production line, and then we can add all the other ingredients to the compost at that stage.
What is the role that peat plays in that mix?
Peat was originally used because it's a blank canvas. It's inert, and that enables you then to add different fertilisers to it to enable you to really accelerate the growth of the plants and the seeds and the trees. It's a really excellent way of capturing water and air, which enables the roots to really thrive.
Peat may have been a useful growing medium, but to save our remaining peat bogs, the government have advised the horticultural trade to phase it out completely by 2030. In the last 10 years, peat use has been reduced by 18%. So there is some way to go, but alternative ingredients are available, so why can't peat-free compost be produced sooner?
I think there's three main challenges that we need to overcome. First is the availability of enough raw material. The second is how do they behave? So a peat-free formulation can behave very differently to a peat-based product. So there's some technical challenges we need to overcome as well to ensure that the product works as well as a peat-based. We don't want to disappoint the gardener. And the third part is around the manufacturing. The products run slower down the production line because you're using more in different ingredients, so there's adaptations need to happen in the manufacturing plants. All of those things can result in an increase in cost. So we have to make sure that when we're moving it into peat-free, that we're not driving the cost up.
But when is the actual final aim to be peat-free?
So across our different brands, we're targeting to be peat-free in the next 3 or 4 years.
So replacing peat isn't that easy. Alternative materials may have to be shipped around the world or could be hard to source, and the process of using them is more expensive, and the industry is finding that cost hard to absorb.
I am convinced that the alternatives to peat are completely viable and not in any way involving a lessening of quality. But we all have to be part of that, and I think it's up to all of us gardeners to experiment with different types of compost, with different types of plants. And in many ways, it's an exciting challenge. And we will be looking later on in the programme at the further effects of reducing and cutting out peat use to the industry and the trade. Now, I'm going to add some plants to my flowering meadow here in the orchard, and it's a way really of recycling bulbs. I've got a lovely big pot, it's one of 2 of great hyacinths, muscari, and these flowered with an incredible shimmering cobalt blue from late February into April. Absolutely wonderful. But they will grow perfectly well in grass. So I'm just going to get in there underneath it. We've got a good clump there, and I think I'm going to keep it as a clump. So what I'll do is I'll just cut out a square of turf, and I can just drop the bulbs into it. Let's pull that out a bit. Here we go. That fits into there nicely. And anyone who's grown muscari in a border knows that they do spread. And that's a great virtue in grass like this. Right, we'll keep that to one side. That then will free up this pot, and I can use that for a summer display. And all bulbs have done really well this year. It's been a good spring for bulbs, but I don't think anything has been better than the tulips. It's been one of the very best tulip years I can remember for ages. And we can certainly see that in this film that's been sent to us from a garden in Buckinghamshire belonging to Joe Hackney.
Hello, my name's Jo. I have a small garden, so I just felt that I needed to put an extra splash of colour in, and just went mad this year with a load of cheap trugs and a load of bulbs and just threw them in. You see, I've painted a really old wheelbarrow there for a bit of splash of colour. My personal favourites, I think, are these. As I say, I threw the bulbs in, didn't know what to expect. Initially, the pale pink ones came out, and I thought, oh great, they're going to be all pink. But actually, through the last couple of months, they've been popping up randomly. And as you can see, massive display of colours, different heights, and I just really think it works.
I'm doing a bit of preemptive staking here. The secret of all good support of plants, particularly herbaceous plants, is to provide the stakes or the twine or whatever you use before they need it. And I thought those tulips looked fantastic. But if you are inspired to grow tulips next year in a wheelbarrow or in trugs, just remember that you will need drainage, because tulips hate sitting in damp soil. Put the drainage in there, drill holes where necessary, and maybe they'll look as good as Joe's. But what is certainly absolutely loving it is the forget-me-nots, which has created a layer of blue mist rolling in under all the planting here in the cottage garden. Now, still to come on today's programme. Carol explores the wonderful world of euphorbias.
Sometimes euphorbias hybridize spontaneously. This means that it's an extremely versatile plant. You can grow it almost anywhere, from full sun to dappled shade.
But first, we're back with Arit as she continues her exploration of what the implications of reducing and ceasing to use peat are to the industry and the trade, and also people who use it, how it's going to affect the way that they garden.
While peat-free compost is available to us at many of our garden centres and nurseries, it's a totally different matter when it comes to buying plants. Most of the plants we buy, which come from wholesalers, nurseries and garden centres, are still grown in peat-based compost. Back in April, I visited the small family-run Middlecombe Nursery in North Somerset, where owner Nigel North is overcoming the challenges of moving their plants to peat-free. Nigel, how are you approaching going from being peat-based to non-peat-based?
With a great deal of thought, to be perfectly honest. I think we've all got to do it at the end of the day. But obviously we've been in the pipeline of using peat, as every other nursery has, for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And so we've got to wean ourselves off it. Not every plant will like a peat-free medium in the formulation that it's supplied to us. The peat suppliers who do our peat compost, they've worked out a compost that covers the broad spectrum of perennials that we mainly grow. We're not used to doing that with a peat-free compost. We've got to do some trials, do our plants like it, and eventually we will go over to being peat-free.
Are you finding that there's any cost implication with this, Nigel?
Yes, there is. The actual compost element would go up by about 10 to 15%.
When do you think then that the whole nursery will be 100% peat-free?
I would have said if we can do it within 5 years, I think I would be happy with that. And to a certain extent, it's dependent on customer demand.
What can we as gardeners be doing to kind of help the situation?
I think question the compost you're buying at the time. I think multi-purpose peat-based compost has been, the wonder consumer product to do everything in the garden. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of domestic gardeners perhaps use peat-based multi-purpose compost far too freely.
Okay.
I see no benefit whatsoever in putting it into the soil. I think they should be using a soil conditioner. Soil conditioners from waste products such as straw, wood, green waste. There's a whole number of soil conditioners for use in the garden on veg plots that are far, far better. I think we need to stop consuming peat and using something else, and I think we waste too much of it.
With 3 million more of us taking up the joys of gardening in the last year, sales of compost have soared by 35%. With that huge extra demand on resources, it's even more important we make informed choices about what we're buying. So how easy is it to know what's in the bag? This garden centre has dedicated an aisle to peat-free compost, which is great for us gardeners because we know where to look for it. And on the bags, peat-free, 100% peat-free. This one says peat-free, so it looks as if the manufacturers that are doing peat-free compost are really shouting about it. Now to look at the aisle with peat-based compost. Let's take a look at this one. So, on the front, nothing clearly stating anything about peat, so let's take a look on the other side. And, aha, there it is. General information, percentage of peat, just under 50% of this bag of compost has got peat in it. So there is a clear label. I'm just going to go and have a look at another bag. Let's have a look on this bag. So far, yep, nothing on the front. So let's turn it over. And, okay, here it is. Slightly different layout. And there's this piece here about aiming for peat reduction. But on this pack, 50% of this compost is peat. So the labelling is most definitely better than it was 2 to 3 years ago. But as gardeners, what is clear is that we need to take our time and know what it is we're buying before we take it home. So, do the gardeners here today take into account the ingredients in their compost? Can I be so nosy as to ask what type of compost that you buy?
Well, I try and go for all-purpose,
Right.
but I also try to make sure it's peat-free.
Why is it then that you've converted to being a peat-free compost user?
I do understand the loss to the habitat of peat, and it's just want to keep the environment the way it was.
Do you actually have a look and see what ingredients are on there?
We didn't, did we?
No,
We just literally
no.
just, we went value for money, I'm afraid, so
Yeah.
being honest, didn't we?
If I gave you a choice of peat-free and not peat-free, would it matter to you?
Probably not really. One of my friends mentioned the other day that she had problems finding peat-free compost and she had to go around to quite a few different garden centres to get some.
It is costly with the garden. Would that sometimes prohibit you from buying peat-free?
Probably not, no, but it's just if you can get a better deal, then obviously you're going to go for that, aren't you?
Having spoken to industry and some members of the public here, I can see that there is a desire to move towards being peat-free. But what I'm wondering is when will the cost to the environment be greater than the cost in pounds to us? So where are we? The government just announced that they aim to end the sale of peat and peat-containing products in the amateur sector by the end of this Parliament, which is currently 2024. The exact nature of any ban on peat use will be determined through a consultation that will take place later this year. And the government are committed to phasing out the use of peat in all horticulture in England by 2030. In light of this announcement, the major retailers we contacted said they understand the importance of peatlands and are committed to reducing peat in their products. And the big brands who replied to us that supply them said they are also committed to phasing out peat in compost with support from government. What is going to make the difference is if we all do our bit too, and that is already happening. The amount of peat in products sold to us gardeners has dropped in the last 10 years. That's encouraging, but I think we can do even more to bring about change. As gardeners, we can make a difference by reducing the amount of peat that comes out of our peatlands. That's by going into our garden centres, looking at labels and making an informed choice about the type of compost we use in our gardens. And that could make the difference to improving our environment.
I am completely confident that in 2 or 3 years' time, none of us will think of using peat in our gardens, and it won't be used commercially, and we will have moved on. And not only will that be good for the environment and good for tackling climate change, it also can be good for our gardens. It certainly won't do any harm. Now, I'm going to use some compost now to grow some herbs. A few weeks ago, I planted up a terracotta pot with Mediterranean herbs. So I put the pot at the back of the herb garden where it will get the most sun, but there are lots of other herbs that will grow in some shade. This is a standard coir-based peat-free compost with some perlite and leaf mould added to it. And at the centre, I'm going to put some dill. These lovely ferny frondescent leaves, which are so distinctive and great with fish, and I'm going to make this my centrepiece. The favourite herb that we grow, of all the ones we grow here at Longmeadow, without question, is parsley. And there are 2 types of parsley you can grow. When I was growing up, this was absolutely the dominant parsley, curly leaf parsley. And this, which is the flat leaf or French parsley, and sometimes you can buy varieties called Italian giant. It needs plenty of water and it's got a long taproot. Now these are chives. Now chives and parsley make a very good little hedge in the vegetable garden because you can grow them from seed. A packet of seed will give you dozens of plants. This is a sorrel. Now, sorrel is one of those adult tastes. It's zingy and sharp, and this looks very handsome too. Now, I'm tempted to break this up actually, because as with all these, there's a sprinkle of seedlings. And I think if we have them on either side, that will look better. I think we've got some room for coriander. The great thing about coriander is it has two roles. You have the leaves with that very distinctive flavour, and also the seeds, which can then of course be stored. And what it does do is go to seed very quickly. If it's at all dry or hot, this will bolt, flower and set seed sharp. Now, when life gives you coriander seeds, collect them, keep them, they're delicious. And like the sorrel, I'm going to break this up. So I'm just going to use my thumbs to get in there and pull it apart. And that will do no harm at all. We'll put one in there and one in here, and we're starting to have a full house. Right, I will just gently fill the compost around these herbs, water it well, and put it in the shady part of the herb garden, and I think it's rather good. Well, for those of us who don't have a garden, you might think that it's absolutely essential to grow everything that you've got in a pot. Well, we've been sent a film from Suffolk from one of our viewers who shows that if you think laterally, there are more ways of growing indoor plants than you might think.
Hello, my name is Olga. I'm originally from Estonia. Today I would like to show you some of our indoor garden and share some ideas. This is our sunny plants, mostly cacti, and I'd like to show you our coffee table. I've constructed this wooden box to go underneath on the shelf and planted small cacti with a good spacing. This allows them to grow naturally and spread. We like to grow lots of tropical climbing plants, and because I have so many, I decided I can start making my own support sticks, support board, using coir mats like this one, and any type of wood and a bit of string. However, I realized plants are growing really quick, and after a while they're already on the top. One day we decided, why not to make a very large one that will accommodate many plants and also look very beautiful and realistic, like a tree trunk. So this is something I'm really passionate about, is right here. Plants are chosen very carefully. It will be plants that like semi-shade or shade. This looks absolutely natural. I don't really like seeing pots. I like lots of greenery in abundance. At the same time, saving space and also saving the watering times, because you only need to water once a week or so from the top, allowing water slowly run down and miss the time to time. When plants happy, I'm happy.
I have to say that I am a very recent convert to the joys of houseplants. But if you weren't converted until now, you will be, because Olgas are fantastic. Don't they look superb? And I love that idea. Now, I hope that you join me in sowing some dahlias and growing them from seed. We started this in March, sowed them, grew them on, pricked them out, potted them on, and what we have now are very healthy little plants looking like this. And I have to say, remember, this is cactus mixed. So they're not all going to be identical in flower or even in growth. At this stage, what really matters is what's happening to the roots. If I press that and take it out, that is ready to pot on or plant out. These could go straight out into the ground. But if, like me, you haven't quite got that situation and it's still fairly cold at night, the best thing to do is to pot them on. And that's what I'm going to do now. Now I'm going to put that back in its pot, so that can sit like that, and then go up a size of pot. Put some compost in the bottom, and then put the whole pot on top of that. And with the plant in its original pot, add more compost to it. And then carefully take out the first pot. And what you're left with is a space that will exactly fit this. We just pop it in like that. That's it. And you haven't had to touch the roots, you haven't had to press it down, just shake it, and when you water it, that will push the soil around it. And as I say, I would expect mine to be planted out round about the beginning of July. That should be about it. Now, this is all about planning ahead and making sure that we have the best possible colour for late summer and early autumn. But right now, in May, in our gardens, the most electric colour has to come from euphorbias with that wonderful zinging yellowy green. So this seems to be a good moment to go back and rejoin Carol when she visited Oxford Botanic Garden.
With more than 2,000 species, Euphorbiaceae is one of the biggest flowering groups of plants on the planet. It grows on every continent except Antarctica. The common name for euphorbia is the spurge, but it's the 150 or so species which thrive in temperate regions of the world that are of real interest to British gardeners. These are the plants that shine forth with these brilliant beacons, and this is their time, May. The characteristic of euphorbias that attracts us and the pollinating insects are these brilliant inflorescences. Most of us refer to them as flowers, but in actual fact, euphorbias have no petals, no sepals, and their flowers are contained in a unique structure called a cyathium. Within each one of these units are the male flowers, of which there may be several, and the female flower, there's only ever one of her. And nectar is produced in glands within this cyathium. In come the pollinating insects. They pollinate the female flower here, and gradually it swells. Inside are the seeds, and as that seed pod ripens and goes brown, on a really, really hot day, the whole thing explodes and disperses it all over the place. One characteristic all euphorbias share is the milky sap that weeps out of the stems when they're cut. The latex is extremely caustic, causing severe irritation and burning. If it gets in the eyes, it can cause blindness. If you get it on your skin or in your eyes, wash it off immediately with clean water. I've abandoned my big gloves because I need a bit more finesse when I'm doing this. And I'm also wearing glasses, both to help me see, but also to protect my eyes. Really important if you're taking euphorbia cuttings to make sure that all your extremities are protected. From this big, long length of stem, I can probably make 3, possibly 4 cuttings. First of all, I want a piece about 6 inches, 15 centimetres long. And I want to cut above a bud. Yeah, that's fine. It's not bleeding very much, but what I'll do is take off a couple of these bottom leaves too. So I've got a nice clean length of stem. And I'll dip the end of this into some warm water, which will just help heal it over. It's less likely to rot in that case too, and we won't have latex all over the place. So 1 cutting, 2, 3, that's enough, I think, to start with. Now, if you've filled your pot with nice gritty compost, it's just nice open compost. It's got quite a lot of loam in it as well. So I'll just shake it down a little bit, and all I need to do is insert these cuttings so that about half is under the surface of the compost, and then just take some grit and put it right over the surface of the compost. And that does 3 things. Stops weeds developing, it'll retain the moisture in there. The third thing that the grit does is to make sure that the cuttings don't rot, because there's all that sharp drainage just around their stems. They'll take several weeks, maybe a few months to take root, and don't start to think about potting them on until you actually see little white roots emerging from the hole in the base of your pot. And then water really well. And that's it, to done. Sometimes euphorbias hybridise spontaneously, as is the case with this very glamorous Euphorbia martini. It's the result of a happy marriage between two euphorbias, one from the Iberian Peninsula and the Mediterranean, Euphorbia coraceus, and another, a woodlander, Euphorbia amygdaloides, our own native wood spurge. This means that it's an extremely versatile plant. You can grow it almost anywhere, from full sun to dappled shade. It just shows you how versatile euphorbias can be. And quite frankly, no garden should be without them.
Come on, good girl. Well, by and large, our soil is a little bit too heavy and wet for most euphorbias, by no means all. But here in the dry garden, we've got good drainage, and this year I think has been better for euphorbias than any I can remember, and they're still looking fantastic. But I want to add a little bit more colour. And this is a plant called Tolbagia. It's a type of garlic, and it smells very strongly of garlic, which I like, but obviously some people don't. It's a South African plant, which loves good drainage, plenty of sunshine, so it needs a nice loose root run. Now, we've got that here in the dry garden, but it's fairly shallow. However, in my experience, this will be fine. As long as the roots can spread in some direction, they'll be okay. And the reason why it's shallow is because there's a very thin layer of soil over a bed of stone, which is why we call it a dry garden. And if I think I can take out a hole big enough just to accommodate the Tolbagia. Now, I've kept the Tolbagia in a cold frame over winter, not so much to protect it from cold, because it's reasonably hardy, but to protect it from getting too wet. Bone dry all winter, completely happy, then you water it in spring, and it starts to grow and then starts to flower, and goes on flowering. That's the beauty of it. It really flowers as long as those roots can have a decent run all summer long. Okay, let's see if I can get that into there. And it's that combination of the colour, which is a delicate lavender mauve, and the delicacy of the foliage and that sort of glaucous green that I love. You see, a good root system. Okay, that just fits in there, and that will be absolutely fine. I love the delicacy of the flowers. They're robust in themselves, given the right condition, but they do have a lovely, delicate shape and colour. Right, I'll tidy up, and I'm definitely going to add a few more in here. And by the way, here's some jobs for the weekend. After a slow start this cold spring, broad beans are now putting on a spurt of growth. But if you leave them unsupported, they will flop all over the place. Any support can be very temporary, just with canes and string. But if you hold them upright for the next month or so, it'll give more light and air to the plants and make the beans much easier to pick. Pelargoniums need protecting from winter cold and, as this year, spring frost too. But now the nights are getting warmer, they can go outside. Put them somewhere really sunny, pick over any dead leaves or cut back any dead stems, give them a good water, and enjoy the colour and fragrance in full sunshine. To give your tulips as good a chance of flowering well next year as you possibly can, it's worth nipping off the seed heads once this year's flowers have finished. That will leave all the available goodness to go down through the stem and the leaves to form a nice big bulb for next year. I've got 2 fig trees here in the dry garden that are the same. They're both brown Turkey, which is by far the most robust fig to grow in this country. But they're very different in size and in the way that they perform. This one is incredibly productive. In a good year, we get scores of delicious fruit off it from late July through to sometimes as late as mid-October. And we prune it accordingly because the fruit will ripen and form best if it gets sunshine. Sunshine and heat will help. And anything that blocks the sun is bad news. So you want to prune it so it's open, almost 2-dimensional. Figs do very well trained as fans or as cordons against a wall, and the wall will reflect the heat. Now, in terms of pruning, I don't need to do much here. This is not a bad shape. But anything coming out that will have leaves that will block the fruit behind it wants to be removed. So we get in here and I will just get right in and saw that off. And there we go. But on this side, I've got a fig which was actually planted on the same day, about 25 years ago. Much bigger tree, and we've allowed this to grow simply for its decorative qualities. And obviously by summer, when these lovely big fig leaves are on here, it's magnificent. And it bears less fruit, this tree that is 3 times the size than that one. So I want to prune it a little bit to lift the crown up. And that will do 2 things. One, we'll be able to see, because more light will get in, and these plants that really do best in full sun will grow a bit better. But the important thing is not to spoil the shape. Now, if I get in here, you can see these lower branches are the ones that I'm going to take off. So if I get in here, I can prune right there. There we go. Sorry, Nelly. Right, I'll stand back and have a look at that. This was a job that I'll do steadily. I'm not going to rush at this. So we've run out of time, and I won't be here next week, but I will leave you in the more than capable hands of Arit and Francis combined. And I'll be back here at Longmeadow in a fortnight's time. So until then, bye-bye.